So welcome everybody to this latest episode of Macklin's Take with me, Andy Clark, and Matt Macklin. Hope everybody is well. Macklin, how are things with you? You've just been resolving a few technical issues at the start of the podcast there.
I mean, my iPad's, I don't know, decided to go weird. So I'm doing this on my phone. So I hope nobody rings while we're doing it.
Well, we'll get a window into your popularity in that case. We'll see. We'll see how much in demand you are. The sound's good though. The sound's good. So hopefully all will be well. Hope everybody else is well. Weather's picked up a bit, which is always enjoyable. Beginning to feel like we might be heading towards some kind of a summer after just torrential rain over the course of the last few days. Anyway, I'm not here to give you a weather report. So on to today's episode, and today we're talking to someone who has been on the list right from the very beginning, but we were planning to wait until we could sit down and do it in person, not something we've been able to do for ages because we knew we'd be seeing him around at press conferences and at various places regularly because we did pre-COVID, and we thought that would be more fun. He's a pal of ours, so it's always better to sit down and have a cup of coffee and a chat. But as it turns out, this is actually the perfect time to speak to him because he has got a book out. It's been released over the course of the last few days in the UK and the USA, and it is a very, very interesting read. I always assume a lot of knowledge on behalf of Macklin's Take listeners, and you'll be aware of this book, I think, if you've got a boxing presence on your timeline. It's called Damage, the Untold Story of Brain Trauma in Boxing. So that's the subject that we're mainly going to get into today. We might touch on some other bits and pieces towards the end, but it is a very involved subject, a very important subject. And I believe this is a very important book that he's written. It's not his first one, not by any stretch, just over my shoulder. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to find one of his lurking. There are two, actually. No, three. There are three. He's written four, I think, in total. So I've got them all now. He sent me a copy of Damage. He was editor of Boxing News for a good spell. He's been in and around boxing for a really long time as a participant from a young age, and in a professional capacity as a journalist for not far off, I think about 20 years now, which considering he's, I believe, a couple of years younger than me, early 40s, that is an impressive stint. Tris Dixon, how are you?
That's a really great billing, isn't it? could have listened all day. Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, actually, you just reminded me. So my first piece I ever wrote was it was a friend of mine from my amateur club, Salisbury ABC, and he was boxing in a cattle market at Frome, and I covered his fight, and I wrote several paragraphs, sent in a picture to the local paper, Salisbury Journal. This was 1996. They used the paper, they used the picture, they used the words word for word, and I didn't get a byline, didn't get any credit. But that was the first piece I wrote back in 1996. So yeah, 25 years ago.
No, you never forget that kind of first one, do you? I remember the first time I got sent to do any reporting for the radio when I was working for TalkSport. That would have been kind of late 2000. It was Reading against Grays Athletic in the either first or second round of the FA Cup. Reading won 4-0. You won't be interested to know, but God, I was shitting it. I tell you, it's like I don't know how your experience was, but I remember I'm doing like 20, 30-second reports, probably about every 10 minutes. And for the first one, I'm surprised I managed to get any words out. And then the one at half time, I had kind of like a bit of a brain freeze and dried up, and it felt like it went on forever. But when I listened back to it, it went on for about 2 or 3 seconds, which was long enough. But yeah, you go a long way back in boxing. As I said, you boxed as a youngster, and to get onto the professional side of it as quickly as you did, and specializing in that particular subject, you are a very long-serving member of the boxing press for somebody who just isn't that old.
Yeah, it feels like I've been around a long time. You know, plenty of people have come and gone from what we call press row over that time. Obviously, there's been different incarnations of TV stations with different bits of superiority, promoter swings, and all the rest of it. There's been for me, just shy of 70 trips to Vegas, covered. I think I've covered boxing in 12 countries, 4 continents. Done a lot, and that's one of and it's been a great sport to me, and I've been fortunate that I've always said, in fact, I've always said to myself, I've never said this out loud. I always thought that I had a role in boxing, and that I had a purpose in boxing. And it was kind of funny when I became the editor of Boxing News, I was thinking, right, I'm going to shake things up now. And then you sort of get lost on the treadmill, and it's like living in an echo chamber, and nothing really happens. And I think Matt would feel my frustrations, and probably Claude did before, and Claude probably chuckled to himself when he heard what my ambitions were and how I hoped to change the game. And then I thought, when I did Ricky Hatton's autobiography, I was thinking, well, maybe this is what I'm here for. Maybe my mission was to try and help Ricky navigate a tough period in his life. And I thought maybe this was my purpose. And then when The Road to Nowhere came out, I was thinking, well, and obviously that was the last interview that so many great fighters did, before they passed away, trying to find those old guys in America. I was thinking maybe that was my purpose in boxing, to give those guys one last day in the sun. And I was thinking, I was, and for a long time, I was quite content with that, thinking, so many of those guys, I was pleased to get their stories out sort of one last time. And then obviously now we talk and Damages come out. I'm thinking, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what I was supposed to do all along. Maybe this is the sort of eureka moment, my epiphany, and the thing that I was supposed to do. And I don't know, maybe, Matt Christie said it quite well in Boxing News, and Thomas Hauser in a review of it as well said, basically, it will only really make a difference if anyone reads it and actually acts upon it. There's plenty of scope for change in boxing, but now let's see who's paying attention, and let's see who actually does want what's best for the fighters, and can actually take their eye off this pay-per-view treadmill for more than 5 minutes, and actually start to think that we actually need to get our house in order.
Well, that's the perfect lead into to discuss the book and everything around it. We'll get back to some other things a bit later on, particularly Boxing Life Stories, which I listen to every week. You're a fellow practitioner, a fellow podcaster, of course, and I think some of the listeners to that will probably quite enjoy a little bit more of a life and times of Tris Dixon, and listen to you answer some questions. But the book, I've been dying to ask you this since I discovered you were doing this, which is a while ago now, because this has been a long-term project. You kind of answered it to a degree there, but at what point how did it happen that you realized that somebody was going to have to try and force this subject, this elephant in the room, out into the open? And at what point after that did you think to yourself, well, it's going to be me then, I'm going to do it?
So, yeah, the 2 points to that. Just in terms of the backstory, I had wanted to write a book about life after boxing for a little while, and didn't know really what direction to take than just, the normal stuff. And then I'd written it, and Matt might remember this, back in about 2011, 2012, because I spoke to Matt at the time. I'd written a long piece about depression in boxing for Boxing News. And it was something, I put something on, because I had the Boxing News Twitter handle at the time, and it said, I'm writing a piece on depression in boxing. If anyone wants to drop me a line, DMs are open, or something like that. And I went away for a cup of coffee and came back, and my DMs were filled with fighters from around the UK and the US, and some big names and some smaller names like Matt. And you can laugh at that. And yeah, and I was thinking, right, okay, I thought this was a big issue, because we lost some people. We lost Lewis Pinto, we lost the Smith brothers to suicide. We'd also lost Dean Powell. We'd lose Glyn Leach from Boxing Monthly. And I was thinking, and I've had my bad spells over the years as well. And you think, this is big in the sport. But I suppose in a more direct answer, all of that was in the background. And then a more direct answer to your questions, I was reading the NFL book, The League of Denial, which is about the concussion crisis over there. And I was reading that while on a holiday with my kids. And I was reading about this CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And I was thinking, well, these football players they're describing, NFL greats, they're like, a lot of boxers have had these same sort of issues over the years. Like they've lost fortunes, been depressed, behavioral issues and all the rest of it. And they were putting it down to head trauma. And then obviously going through the book, I had this big eureka moment where it was actually there in black and white. And it said basically CTE is what was referred to as punch drunk syndrome, which is obviously, you know, everyone in boxing knows it as being punch drunk, or a more scientific name is dementia pugilistica, but that's been outdated and proved incorrect anyway, because dementia is not always present in it. So CTE, the stuff that footballers had, was actually punch drunk syndrome, which is what boxing had. And then doing a bit more research, the first medical paper about it came in 1928 by Harrison Martland, and it was actually called punch drunk. And I'm like, geez, like American football is doing all this. It's caused massive change. And I've only just learned it's the same thing. And I've been in boxing by that stage more than 20 years. And I'm like, no one ever told me any of this. No one ever told me about the links with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and ALS. No one ever told me about CTE and what punch drunk syndrome was. Sure, you know the terminology, or someone might be a bit punchy, and it was always very derogatory. And I never saw that with the NFL greats. There was always a lot of sympathy, and that was one of the things stigmas I really wanted to attack, because there shouldn't be any kind of disgrace in being, in inverted commas, punchy, because these guys are warriors and they've put everything on the line for boxing and the sport, and fight for their futures, to give themselves a better life, and for our entertainment. And they deserve a lot more credit and respect than they get for just being called punchy and people just tutting at them and almost forgetting that they exist. So it was reading that really and thinking, geez, this is actually, you know, the NFL's now reluctantly addressed it, and people in boxing don't even know it's boxing's problem. And I was thinking, you know, let's do it. Let's do it. And it sort of then weaved in the stuff about depression that I'd mentioned, and it weaved in the aspect of doing something about life after boxing. And then obviously it weaved in this massive thing where, you know, it was something that, you know, it's very hard. I remember Thomas Hauser telling me years ago, you know, good books break new ground. And I was like, this is new ground. Like, no one's touched this. No one's done this. Although that Martland paper was 1928, nearly 100 years ago, there's been next to nothing in popular culture about this. Medical literature, yes. Popular culture, not so much. And I thought, let's do it. And then the idea is, obviously, with the book, is to help educate people and to be sympathetic towards fighters and their families. And obviously there's some really moving stuff in there with families and with boxers, where, you know, I want to be sympathetic towards these guys and not mock them, because some of them, Leon Spinks in particular, you know, there's a story in there where Brenda Spinks, his now widow, was talking about him being mocked on a radio station of how he spoke and stuff. And, you know, our guys just deserve so much more than that. And I want to try and do the best I can to try and put a stop to that.
Well, you mentioned the NFL there, and you used the perfect word when you said they reluctantly addressed it, because there was a lot of reluctance, wasn't there? They didn't want to know. They wanted to wash their hands of it, deny it at all costs. And then they got to the point where they couldn't, at which stage they then dealt with it. With boxing, it's kind of different, isn't it? It's this situation where everybody's always known, but everybody's kind of agreed to shrug their shoulders and pretend that it isn't that. Matt, from a pro's point of view, when you start, how aware were you when you were a younger man of just how dangerous it is, or how dangerous it can be? Did you look at fighters who had retired and see what had happened to them and think, well, that's an inevitable consequence of boxing? Or did you think, well, it could be boxing, it could be something else, it could be a combination, you know, let's not worry too much about that now?
No, I think I was aware of it. Look, you're getting punched in the head, aren't you? You know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that that ain't good for you. But it's so overshadowed by your ambitions and your hopes and dreams, and then the drive for success and glory, that it just pales into insignificance in comparison. You know, it's almost like an accepted risk. You know, I won't say the names, but there was a guy who I sparred when I first turned pro, and I would have known him quite well, even through as an amateur. He would have been someone that was, you know, a good bit older than me, would have been boxing, was a good amateur, then ended up boxing professionally. I remember sparring him, and I sparred him for a week or two, and then I didn't ask him back to spar again because his reflexes were shot, and I couldn't miss him. And even at that point, his speech was starting to slur, and I just thought, nah, I just didn't feel good about it. You know what I mean? It was like he was nowhere near the fighter he was, and he was just like target. He just wasn't. I felt uncomfortable. It was, and I just thought so. That was something that was directly. I could see visibly. It was someone that I'd known. I still knew him. I was speaking to him. We were sparring. I could see the deterioration in his speech. I haven't seen that person in many years, but I'm guessing it's only got worse. It won't have gotten better. So of course that. Look, having a hard career, hard fights, too many punches, it's not gonna end well. But it's a funny one because some fighters that I've met, who are a lot older, who are legendary, who had absolute wars, are completely coherent today. It's like there's no effect. And there's other guys that I would have thought in comparison didn't have anywhere near the sort of trauma. Obviously, I don't know what they did in sparring, but I'm certainly from their fighting careers, didn't have the same sort of brutality in their careers. Yet they're struggling to speak properly. It is a shame. Tris is right. I mean, Tris talked there about stigma. I don't know if it's a stigma with some people. Maybe it is with some people, but I think it's pity. And not pity is not pity, but I think there's people don't know what to do or what to say. That they feel a lot of sympathy, but they also feel a little bit, what do I say about it? You know what I mean? I think there's a bit of that as well, as opposed to people laughing at them or being, judging them or looking down at them. I just think they feel uncomfortable, that they don't know what to say about it or how to be with that person because they can see they're visibly, deteriorating.
That's another big reason for the book, by the way, Matt, is to make people comfortable talking about the uncomfortable, so that these people aren't just ignored, and so that people do know what to say, and so that they are able to have a conversation with them, and so that it's no longer the elephant in the room, and that it was to try and peel back that scab, so that people don't feel awkward about it. When these guys in the NFL go and meet, and obviously I haven't been privy to it, but I can't imagine them being the same way that boxers are about it, where it's that bit being that sort of elephant in the room all this time.
It was interesting hearing you talk there about how the NFL, it was a conversation that people didn't want to have. It's almost like people don't want to accept that it's a problem. You see this in many areas in life, people that are struggling with booze. I've seen it with people with families where their families are like, don't want to accept it. It's almost like they're embarrassed, or they're trying to pretend it's not there. And now it is there, and it's not going to go away until you do something about it. It's like, I think, I don't think this is an issue that's just, I don't want to go off on a mad tangent, but it like you say, if you can't accept there's a problem, if you're in denial about it, then accepting there's a problem is the first stage in getting over any problem. Because if you're in denial that there's a problem in the first place, how can you even start to begin to solve it?
Tris, that has been a huge problem, hasn't it? The denial factor, and I think one of the reasons why there has been so much denial down the years is because people have felt that if they talk about this, if they bring it out into the open, it might see boxing banned. A great example of that is the great man himself, Ali. He always insisted that it wasn't related to boxing, and they described it as Parkinson's, and the family stuck to that. But apparently, if you spoke to him privately, he knew it was because of boxing, but he never wanted to say it because he thought it might damage the sport. He thought it might get the sport banned. But you can't look at it in that kind of binary way, because these are people's lives.
But also, like, that's such a quantum leap, Andy. Like, and I'm just not on board with it. Not in terms of what you're saying there, but yeah, to go from having it to not having it. Like in the book, obviously, I've outlined different things that can change, different parts of the culture, different parts of regulation, different habits in training, and all the rest of it that can mitigate the risk that fighters face. In the ban thing, it's just an easy thing. Don McRae has written a very interesting piece. Well, I have to say it's interesting because it's about the book, but in The Guardian today, and by the time this comes out, it will be online as well. But and you know, the first comment I saw was, oh, you know, head trauma is bad for anybody, boxing should be banned. And it's like, it's not that. And I'm not a woke guy, do you know what I mean? I'm not one of those millennials, you know. I'm an old school guy, and I love the sport, and I love boxing. It's given me loads, and I don't know where my life would have gone without it. You know, it's kept me on the straight and narrow. And people like Ali and Aaron Pryor, their voices can be heard in the book saying that, you know, they wouldn't change the second half of their lives for what happened in the first. And if they could do it all over again, they still would. And those are really loud and important voices, because it is down to choice. And that's a big argument for me. But the ban thing, it's just a huge quantum leap from having it to not having it. And I find it, you know, people who want to go that way, I find it ridiculous. You know, people, as far as I'm aware, people aren't now talking about banning soccer. They're not talking about banning rugby union. They're not talking about banning rugby league. They're not talking about banning the NFL. But boxing's such an easy target. You know, as soon as there's anything negative, oh, ban boxing. You know, do me a favor, as Frank would say. But
Tris, what, obviously writing the book, you're bringing massive awareness to it. I guess that's one of the primary hopes of it. But what are the proposed solutions?
So there's loads. So, you know, there's loads of different things that boxing could do. For a start, a handheld organization, or an organization that holds hands worldwide, where there can be a brain scan database, so that you get a brain scan and then you get it checked regularly and compared over time. At the moment in the US, right, so one state might require you to have an MRI, one state might require you to have a CAT scan, one state might require you to have both, and another state might require you to have neither. And that's just in the USA. So these loopholes where, you know, like the fella you said you were sparring, like that sort of stuff needs to not happen. And the stuff with Nick Blackwell that we've had and stuff, like there needs to be the education where people know that, you know, people have been damaged, they shouldn't be allowed to continue. And I think, you know, this is another part of it is where the neurologists need to have more understanding about the actual sport too. So the neurologists working within boxing need to be able to see what a boxer was like in 2010 and how they are now, and not just track their brain function, but cognitive function as well. Then you look at the culture of the sport, and, you know, you talk about, you know, for example, there's other bits. You know, Mickey Ward, for example, said he thought 90% of his damage, and Mickey's now suffering, he thought 90% of his damage was done in sparring. And if he could do it over again, he'd spar less and he'd spar differently. I think that's an important voice to hear. And when you look at the Ingle Gym, for example, they do a lot of body sparring there, and then they'll bring the head stuff in maybe 2, 3 or 4 weeks out from a fight. And so they'll reduce that daily grind of trauma over, you know, again and again. Freddie Roach said he was sparring 4 or 5 days a week regularly, you know, and now he doesn't have his guys do any more than 2. And I think obviously you know more than me about the ding dongs in the wild card, but I think, you know, Freddie's learned some harsh lessons along the way. So yeah, and then you look at the culture as well. I think fighters need to understand a lot more about the risks that they have while concussed and while they're sparring with headaches. For example, you know, it's an easy one, but look at Nick Blackwell, for example, who obviously said after the fact that he was put in a coma by Chris Eubank Jr. that, oh, actually, I was badly hurt and rattled by George Groves a week before. You know, well, you know, if that's what happens and you're going into a fight like that, you need to not fight, I'm afraid. You know, for the best case scenario, long term, you're going to have to come out of that and wait for another opportunity. But fighters are too stubborn. And, you know, I wasn't much of an amateur. I only had a couple of fights and all the rest of it. But I remember when I went over to train with Kevin Rooney in the Catskills, and I was sparring this kid called Leonard Pierre, who ended up fighting Kelly Pavlik in the pros. And Leonard beat the shit out of me one day, pardon my French. And the next day, I went back to the gym to spar. My head was pounding, like when we'd been road running in the morning. My head was absolutely splitting, headache. And Kevin says to me, "Oh, I want 4 rounds out of you today." Well, what am I going to say to Kevin? You know, I'm there to impress him. I wanted to, but obviously with hindsight now, that's the sort of culture where you need to be able to have a conversation and say, actually, you know, yesterday you know, I took this shot and it was freaking massive and it's really rung my bell. Like, I'm not sure you're going to get the best out of me today. And those are open conversations. And I know it makes me probably sound quite woke in this sport, but, you know, times change. And with the knowledge that we have now, there's loads of things that can change, small things like that, some larger things, but culture, the organisation of sport, sparring, and those are all things that can be changed. I'm not saying they can all be enforced. Certainly, you can't obviously go around and tell people in each gym, oh, we're going to regulate your sparring. It can't be regulated. But if trainers and managers want what's best for the fighters and their health, like so many of them say they do, then let's start seeing who is looking out for the fighters now. Then.
So, Matt, in your experience of being a pro, and you talked about sparring a bit earlier on, do you think it's that area that it would be the easiest to make some changes in, greater education for trainers and fighters and sparring? Like, you know, that is, you know, so much damage can be done in sparring, because I just wonder whether what happens on the night, whether it's that easy to change that, because that is boxing and that's what it is. But in the gym, I think untold damage can be done in the gym, and you would know better. You would know better than me. Is that the one area where you think things actually could be changed?
Without a doubt, and you know, I'd probably agree and echo with what Tris said about Mickey Ward. They're at 90% of the damage being done in sparring. You know, when you're primed and you're ready and you're sharp and you've got the adrenaline pumping on the night, yeah, you get hit and the gloves are small. Of course, some of the fights are brutal, no doubt. But, you know, in the gym, when you're a bit heavy and you're not as sharp and you're trying to get fit, you get hit a lot more. You take a lot more shots. And, yeah, you maybe not getting bruised up a bit and you've got head guards. But the brain trauma is still getting, the head's still getting shook. You're still losing X amount of brain cells. Like, you know, Tris described there how he felt after a spar. I can't even tell you how many days I felt like that after. Like, I had some brutal spars because I sparred quite hard, and I was in gyms where that's how they did spar. You know, in Billy Graham's gym, we sparred hard. But what I would say about Billy's, we didn't spar hard for 6 weeks. It was usually a couple of weeks. We didn't massively. We didn't do weeks and weeks of sparring. We got pretty fit first, then we sparred the last. You know, you probably did maybe 3 weeks of sparring, and we didn't do 10 and 12 rounds, like 6 rounds, and then we'd bring the intensity up in the rounds with the bar bag or the body belt. So, you know, I think he was on the right lines. Although I don't know if it was a case of preserving, you know, health and head injury, or more just trying to not burn out, because, you know, the two kind of run hand in hand anyway, a little bit. I've spoken to you before, and then I think I did on the podcast about how being over in the wild card, you know, I've seen war after war after war. I was involved in them, do you know what I mean? And I ended up injured and the fight never happened. And I said to you, you know, if the fight had happened, then I'd have continued on the way I was going, sparring like that for another 4 or 5 weeks. There wouldn't have been a fight anyway. And if there had been a fight, I'd have been a shell of myself, because it was all left in the gym. You know, you can't have ding-dongs every day of the week in the gym and expect to come out unscathed. It's not going to happen. Or unless you're someone like, I've seen Manny Pacquiao sparring, who's got unbelievable feet. He's got great speed. And really, he was doing 10 and 12 rounds 3 days a week. But he was absolutely knocking fuck out of the sparring partners. They weren't really hitting him because he was too good for them and he was too quick with his feet. But you know, if you're that type, if you're, like I said before, if you're a Ricky Hatton type of guy who takes one to give one, and he brings an intensity, and he does get hit because he's trying to close the canvas and he's getting in, and until he's super sharp, he's going to take a few on the way in. You know, Ricky only sparred probably for 2 weeks, 5 or 6 sessions, because if he'd have sparred any longer than that, he would have left the fight in the gym. But I've seen in the gyms in America, and Tris will have as well, I have seen those guys spar for 5 and 6 and 7 weeks and spar 10 and 12 rounds and 3 or 4 different sparring partners. And, you know, I think it's a bigger problem over there because of that, how much they spar. I think in the UK, I don't think they spar as much, as hard, or for as many rounds. And I think that's why it's not as big of a deal here. I'm not saying it isn't a deal, but it's not in America, there's so many great fighters that you think, God, they're really punchy now. And it's like, you know, I'm not saying they didn't have hard fights in their careers, but I think a lot of that damage was definitely done in the gym. And that is the area where we can probably regulate it. Like you say, on the night of the fight, how can you stop it being brutal? It's boxing, it's going to be brutal. But I think you can, in the gym, that's where I think everyone across the whole board, across the sport, that's an area where we can maybe look at things and think, this doesn't need to be as intense as often.
Yeah, and just, you know, if I may just add to that, Andy, when you look at the NFL and their procedures, what they've done, they haven't really, they've taken out, obviously, helmet-to-helmet contact, or supposed to have done. I think it still happens. But what they've done is they've changed pre-season and they've changed training things. So they're only allowing a certain amount of contact. And so obviously that's really where Matt's referring to, like behind closed doors, when you're not being paid for it, don't do it. You know, but when the bright lights shine, at showtime, that's the sport. Get on, you know, fight your ass off.
But it's a funny one, Tris, because to be able to do it on the night, there has to be a level of intensity and preparation. But so I think you do need a couple of dress rehearsals.
Sure.
But I don't think you need it I don't think you need it 3-4 times a week for 6 weeks. It's too much.
Yeah, no, I agree.
To what extent do you think, though, that boxing as a sport is, or rather is not, set up in a way that's going to facilitate or even make any of this kind of change possible? Because the one thing we run into again and again, whether it's talking about titles, whether it's talking about fights that should be made that aren't, but whatever it is, the problem is that we don't have a governing body that takes responsibility and that is answerable to by everybody. It's commissions all over the place. It's governing bodies here, there, and everywhere. It's sanctioning bodies. It's this TV, that promoter, this promoter. And do you think that there are enough people, putting it bluntly, within the sport, within positions of authority, who are actually that bothered about making these kinds of changes and making it safer for the fighters? Do they care enough?
Well, let's see. I mean, this is, you'll know this, both of you. You know, you'll be more than aware of this. Probably the top 1% of the guys in the sport make 99% of the money. So it's not really about having enough people on the ground to do it. It's about the movers and shakers having the time and the effort and the inclination to do it. I don't want to name names. People know who's in that 1% of powerful people in the sport, but they're the ones with the power and the money to do it. It's whether they've got the inclination. Hey, listen, when Robert Smith tried to set up a pension fund for fighters here, you'll know because you've read the book, Andy, as a spoiler alert, but he set up this pension fund for fighters, and he couldn't get one person to pay into it. But then, you know, that's because a lot of the smaller guys obviously can't afford another 10% coming out of their purse. And this is part of where the issue comes. And this is where I say the people with the money can make a difference. But obviously, when they get to the big money, then obviously they've earned that and they don't want to share it. And it's understandable. But obviously, if everyone was to chip 10% into an organization, some people will be chipping in a $5 or a $10. Some people actually even pay to get on shows, as you know, as well. And some people will be having to lump in 4 or 5 million. You know, it's not quite fair, is it? So it's going to take people with power, organisation, and the will to do it, to get it done.
Well, that's the same, Tris, as paying tax. The people who earn £1 billion a year are going to pay a lot more tax than the man who earns 10 grand a year. But he's got a lot more, hasn't he? So
yeah. No. Hey, I agree, but you can also get there. You can also understand the sentiment. Basically, what, you know, if someone's chipping 4 or 5 million to that, they're basically floating the whole thing for everyone else.
I mean, what from the inside of it as a fighter, Matt, and you know the business side of it really well too. Do you think there would be much kind of motivation there, really, for people who are at the top of the system in terms of making the money? Promoters as well, managers, sanctioning bodies, everybody. Is there the motivation there for them to really change a system which, frankly, at the moment works fine for them?
Well, even if you did have certain individuals that were willing and that wanted to, they probably realised that them alone isn't enough, that it's going to be so sort of futile. It's going to make such a negligent effect or impact. What's the point? It's like boxing so fragmented between different commissions, different sanctioning bodies, titles, etc. I mean, it's chaotic, really. We understand it because we're in it, you know. But it's such a, like Tris said there. You know, you only go, how many different commissions are there in America? Where some commissions you have to have a CT scan, some or CAT scan, some it's got to be MRI, some you don't need any at all. I mean, how do you, even if you're an individual person with influence, how much influence do you have when it's so fragmented like that? You can be personally want to do your best, but then you get to a point and think, well, I'm fighting a losing, unless enough people are on board with me, there's no point.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things you could hope for is, you know, say the British Boxing Board of Control teamed up with Nevada, New York, and some of the influential commissions and created some sort of not a breakaway, but some sort of superpower of organizational structure that was the envy of the world, and other people just wanted to join.
I mean, I don't want to misquote Thomas Hauser, but we did a podcast with him a while back at the Joshua Ruiz fight in New York, and he talked about how these commissions and how people are appointed and etc. And you know, there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of self-interest, there's a lot of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours going on. So it's like, I don't know, until there's enough people in positions of power that really want to make a change, where it's basically top of their agenda, I don't see how we get there.
It's difficult. It is definitely difficult, but I don't want to paint some kind of bleak picture here, because it is very important that this is addressed, and Tris has put a lot of hard work into trying to make a big step here.
And I don't want to cut you short, Andy, and I don't want to pour water on it either. It'll be doom and gloom. Look, where there's a will, there's a way, and people like Tris writing books and creating awareness is massive. But enough people have to read it, have to be aware of it, and want to make the change, because we can all sit here and talk about how bad it is and what should be done, but it's action that makes things change. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So the only way, we can have all the awareness in the world and we can all talk about it, but until we put the action in and make those moves and make those phone calls and write those emails and meet those people and lobby for change, it's not going to change, you know. So look, what Tris has done is unbelievable, but we need more of it.
Do you feel like you've got that much kind of support? Because reading the book, you know, there's so many people who know so much about this, who feel like no one's been listening to them. They feel like they've been talking to themselves, and things, you know, things do change. They can be changed, and you can have situations where all of a sudden people are more receptive to things and they start listening to things. You look at how some sports down the years have changed, and how things in society have been altered, and things that used to be allowed seem completely ridiculous and unthinkable now. An example I always come to for something like this is, you know, when I was a younger man running around town, everybody smoked indoors. Everybody smoked in pubs, in offices, in houses, everywhere. It was just what everybody did. And then there was a smoking ban. And I look back on that now, and I cannot believe that it was ever allowed. Things do change. Things do change. But how does, Tris, how does it start? You know, is the power here with the fight? Is there some power with the fighters? Can they become more educated and say, I'm not going to spar that hard, or I'm not going to take that fight, or how do you see it?
Definitely. And I think, you know, that's a key thing. And obviously, you know, you've got kids who look up to fighters, and, you know, there's messages that can come out from fighters. Remember, after Anthony Joshua fought Andy Ruiz, he did an exclusive on Sky, and he said he didn't know what concussion was. And, you know, that's not the kind of message that needs to go out there to people in the sport. You know, people, this is what Sport Matt says, you know, oh, you know, whether it's, we know the risks, or getting hit in the head isn't good for you. And then you've got the heavyweight champion of the world saying, I don't know what concussion is. It's not, you know, those are opportunities to educate and to have people talk about it. And yeah, I don't know. I think you've hit the nail on the head though, Matt. I think, you know, the stuff about the organizational structure, it can do your head in, and it's not just on medical grounds. You know, obviously when in the wider realms of the sport, you look at drug cheats who get banned in one state and go and fight somewhere else. Or you get guys who, you know, who failed different medicals, whether it's for an eye test, they go and fight somewhere else. And, you know, those loopholes are part of the problem as well that need to close up to allow fighters to have a better life after boxing. We've obviously mentioned Ali already. You know, he went through one of those famous loopholes where he couldn't get a license to fight in the US, so he fought Trevor Berbick in the Bahamas. You know, it's outrageous that that sort of stuff can still happen in 2021. And we've had, you know, in the book, there's a notable mention of a fighter who lost his life a couple of years ago. He was serving a 90-day suspension somewhere, and he snuck under the radar and fought within 70 days or something and died.
I was just going to jump on then. You brought me onto a subject which I was actually going to bring up, and that's performance-enhancing drugs. You know, apart from the fact, forget the fair play element, you know, about winning and losing and having an advantage in a level playing field. Look at the health benefits. Like, really, in boxing, and listen, if you lose the 100 meters race and someone cheated you out of it or the Tour de France, that's horrendous because it's fair, you know, fair play and it's cheating. But in boxing, when people are getting smashed in the head by professional fighters who can deliver a substantial amount of force, and, you know, fatigue is there to protect you. Fatigue, tiredness, pain, it's all there to protect us, really. But when you go beyond that, because unnatural stuff, like, you know, what damage is happening there? You know, personally, I think if somebody takes performance enhances drugs and it was proven and they killed and someone died in a fight, that should be murder as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, obviously they're becoming stronger and fitter and faster through illegal aids.
Yeah,
which, you know, it's, you know, ethically, it's just such a taboo thing, not just in sport, but like you said, in this actual sport, it's probably worse than other sports, just in the sense that, you know, of the consequences. And obviously here we are talking about brain trauma, and actually someone is getting bigger, stronger and faster, superficially or artificially, and able to inflict more damage as a consequence of cheating. It just to say it doesn't sit right with me. I mean, you're not far off where I am with that in terms of, you know, manslaughter, assault. You know, it's and, you know, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but some of these guys have actually failed tests and kept wins on their record.
Yeah,
it's astonishing.
I mean, even the person taking the performance enhancing drugs, you know, he could be doing himself damage by pushing on harder than what he, you know, normally would have been able to.
Well, you know, Margaret Goodman's a great one to talk about that from VADA, where she talks about, you know, people generally don't have a clue what they're putting into their body. And, you know, the people who are taking, and then there's the argument about recreational drugs and saying, oh, well, that's not going to do anything. But obviously, if you're doing recreational drugs and then fighting, yeah, it might enhance your performance, but it's also going to put you at substantial risk as well. You know, whether you're going to be getting dehydrated. And I think there's loads of different things. You know, one of the things that, and I haven't talked about this in the book, but I also wonder, when you look at sports and how sports have moved forwards, and you see, you know, some of these guys are taking on electrolytes in half time and all the rest of it, and different things in sport, and boxing's still just left with water. Like, I do wonder if boxing doesn't need to look at fighters being able to have something in between rounds. You know, I'm not sure that's a conversation that's worth having. You know, you see, obviously, whether it's football, whatever, they go off, they have their Gatorade or whatever it is. But obviously, we talk about dehydration a lot in boxing. Fighters are running a risk there, and it seems to be an opportunity there for them to hydrate and get some goodness in their boxing without actually cheating.
Yeah, as long as it was standardized, I don't see anything. I don't see anything wrong with that. As long as it was obviously the same thing available to everybody else. So, do you think? We said earlier on, I kind of set it up as there are changes that can be made in the gym, but on the night, things can't really be changed too much because that's the sport and that's kind of the way it is. But what could be, do you think, maybe just tweaked on the night? You look at the New York State Athletic Commission, for example. After what happened to Magomed Abdusalamov, they have their protocol now, don't they, where the doctor can take extra time at the end of a round to look at a fighter, and what they're basically trying to assess there is concussion, is trauma there, I think, because that's what the extra time is there for. But that's just in New York. I mean, what kinds of things do you think can be done better?
Well, I think one of the obvious ones is when you look at the book and some of the voices in there, whether it's Dr. Nitin Sethi or Dr. Margaret Goodman, they've both been quite open about the type of doctors that are on hand on fight night. So yes, that you might have a neurologist, you might have someone who works in ER, and those are probably the two best doctors to have ringside. But you might also have a doctor that works in orthopedics. That, yeah, it might be great if you've got a broken hand, but if something's going on with your head and you're concussed and that kind of stuff, they're probably not the right person to be ringside on a fight night. So, you know, I think that's a pretty quick change that could be done so that you standardize the type of doctor that is allowed ringside and that is doing the work.
One thing that I found really interesting was, and this was a little bit of a theme that recurred with a couple of people you spoke to. I can't remember who the second one was, but the first one was definitely George Foreman. And he was a massive advocate of clean living as being a means of reducing the risk of suffering CTE in later life. Now, he's not a doctor, George Foreman, nor am I. And as you say in the book on numerous occasions, it's difficult, and the doctors in the book say this, well, it's difficult until they've looked at a lot more brains and know the circumstances of the people who owned them. It's difficult to know exactly what causes these problems in later life of fighters, whether it is just the head trauma, whether it's that plus personality, whether it's a combination of the two. But George, anyway, was completely convinced that if you live a clean life, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year as a dedicated professional, then you will increase your chances of emerging unscathed significantly. Yeah. And he has so far.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously George was a great guy, and it's great to have his voice in the book. Obviously, you can't tell what's going to happen down the line, but obviously he is getting up there in age. But obviously, we were all saying the same thing about George Chuvalo until a few years ago, and then George started to show bad symptoms and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's a really tough thing. Sorry, Andy, I lost my train of thought there. Where were we?
You're like George Foreman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and healthy living. Sorry. That's me. Yeah, so the healthy, yeah, it is a common thought. And, you know, the neurologists say, you know, if you're going to give yourself the best chance, then it's probably best not to picker your brain with booze and to not take drugs, because, you know, there's a fair chance that after a lot of head trauma, there's fireworks going off in your brain anyway. And what you don't need is to add to that concoction with with drugs that can alter your brain function. I know obviously in the book as well, I think Tony Jeffries talks about it in the book as well, like he's now not drinking at all because he wants to give himself the best chance. Mickey Ward, who I think used to love a few back in the day, has really wound down his alcohol consumption. So, and I think that's a big thing, you know, certainly a big thing for me is, you know, I'm very much an advocate of fighters living the life and staying in and around their weight class the entire time, because their careers are short. And obviously, I don't see the harm. You know, I see these posts, fighter training on Christmas Day and saying, "Oh, no turkey for me," or training on the birthday and no cake for me. I'm like, well, it's only a small window. You know, it's not that hard to miss a few years. Like, I mean, I'm 42 and not fighting, but I still train on Christmas Day, still train on my birthday, and it's still, you know, it is what it is. It's a small sacrifice, but to do. You know, and this is the thing, it's like, so boxing, it's not a hobby, it's not a game, you know, and I know there's this cliche, I've heard Matt say it many times, you don't play boxing. And living the life, I'm confident, I'm no scientist, but I'm sure that will help fighters down the line. If they're not drinking all the way through, if they're not having to dehydrate and cut weight ridiculously, if they're not trying to fight in the wrong weight classes, and losing ridiculous amounts of weight to try and do so. There's no harm in being a proper athlete for 10 or 15 years to give yourself a better life after boxing.
What happens is, I mean, I'm sure you all know, I know plenty of people, I've seen them around, and I know I've even more people that, you know, they've abused alcohol, drugs as well. You know, these are things that chemically change the chemicals in your brain. You're up high, you're down low. Sleep deprivation. You know, if you're doing coke, you could go for days boozing, not eating, not sleeping, hallucinating. You know, that's fucking up your brain chemistry. Do you know what I mean? You see people who have partied hard for years. You see rock bands and different people in the music industry who have sessioned and partied hard, and they're shot. Do you know what I mean? Their brains are shot, and they haven't taken one punch to the head. Then you got the boxer who has a manic career, sparring hard, war after war, probably boozing and doing drugs in between fights, probably hitting it even harder than after. So, you know, that person down the line is going to be shot. But what was it? Was it the boxing? Was it the booze? Was it the drugs? Was it a mixture? And I guess that's what the doctor you spoke about there, Tris, is saying. Like, you know, in order to form a fair test, all the variables have to be the same, don't they? But if if this person hasn't just boxed, hasn't just took punches, but he's also burnt the candle at both ends, he's also took drugs, he's abused alcohol, you know, where do you put, which was it? Was it a combination of all?
Exactly, and that's where you got to factor in some of the famous boxing, criminal cases as well. You know, whether it's Carlos Monzon, whether it's Ike Ibeabuchi or Tony Ayala. Like, were these guys damaged by boxing, or were they born with criminal minds, or did they emerge from some kind of child trauma? You know, were they destined to always go wrong in their lives, or was it brain trauma? We don't know, but obviously this is what the huge fighter study in Las Vegas with more than 800 boxers and mixed martial artists has sort of been built to try and find out, to sort of balance all these imponderables, as well as socioeconomics of a fighter and their backgrounds, try and get to the bottom of really how much is too much.
What was the documentary on Netflix about the New England Patriot player?
Oh, Aaron Hernandez. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dr. Ann McKee studied Aaron Hernandez's brain, and I went and interviewed Dr. McKee for the book. And yeah, I mean, that's all. Yeah, again, that's probably what brought you onto it. Obviously, the criminal mind, a guy who'd had what was it, a couple of murder charges, wasn't it? And then killed himself. And again, we're getting dark now, but suicide's obviously a big thing as well. Loads of fighters over the past, we touched upon it right at the very start of this, but then going back to years and years, suicide's been a big thing in boxing.
Absolutely. But these discussions are bound to get dark at stages, because these are serious issues. And as you say, the reason why people have shied away from them for too long is because they're uncomfortable. They're not pleasant at times, and that's why this kind of debate needs to be brought more out into the open. Matt, what do you think can be done with regard to educating young fighters and making them more aware of the risks? Because I don't think it would really serve too much purpose to try and scare people, and say this is what could happen to you, and possibly some older fighters who are still clear enough but aren't doing so well would go and speak to younger fighters. I think if you go too far one way with it, then in my experience of elite athletes or aspiring elite athletes, that will be met with denial. They will think, well, that won't happen to me. And then they probably won't think about it enough. You need to kind of strike a bit of a balance there, don't you, to try and make people aware, but also not be too heavy-handed with it.
Yeah, like I said before, when I was young and I was turning pro, and I knew, of course, we're aware of it, but it pales. It's so overshadowed by your ambitions, your hunger, your desire, chasing dreams and glory. That's so much more attractive, and you're so focused on that the possibilities of injury and all the rest of it. It just pales into insignificance, and it's almost just forgotten about. Or maybe denial as well, possibly that, because maybe if we looked at it too much, we wouldn't, we wouldn't do it. But I don't know what the answer is. I don't know about the awareness or the education is on the young aspiring athlete boxer, I don't think that's where the sort of focus should be. I think it's more on the coaches, really, the commissions, these kind of people. And look, promoters are making plenty of money out of boxing. TV networks are making plenty of money out of boxing. You know, Tris said there, some fighters are only getting a few grand a fight. You know, to them to throw money into that, whether it be a pension fund or a contribution towards a healthier, better way, they're probably not going to want to do it. But TV networks and promotional companies that are making multi millions, maybe there should be a bit more of a squeeze put on them to throw a bit back to set up this sort of thing. I don't know, but you know, we're having a discussion, aren't we? I don't know, but you know, they're making a lot of money. You know, the boxers that are kind of busting their ass, that aren't really earning a lot, are we really going to say they've got to throw 10% of their person? They're already probably throwing 10 and 15 and 20% away left, right and centre anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Is it something that you worry about? What might be coming down the road for you in 20 years? Is it something that you would talk to other fighters who are retired about, or do you just kind of feel like what will happen and there's no real point in thinking about it too much?
I never really thought about any of this during the early part of my career at all. You know, I didn't because, well, I just didn't. If I did, I probably wouldn't have been able to perform the way I did and train the way I did. But certainly at the end, when I was thinking about retirement and stuff, I mean, of course, ambition, desires, performances, hunger, all that was a big part of that. But definitely, I did start to think about my health. You know, I'd had a 15-year pro career, I had a hard career, I sparred hard. You know, not even just the brain, even my eye. I had some pretty horrendous black eyes and eye trauma where my eyeball was sore for 4 or 5 weeks after a fight. You know, even when all the bruising is gone, I still had pains in the back of my eye. And you hear of so many people with detached retinas and things. And relatively speaking, touch wood so far, I think I came out fairly unscathed. You know, that's debatable. But, you know, it's... But yeah, it was definitely at the end the concern, because I think as you get older, these are things you start to take account of a bit more. But certainly early on in my career, I don't think I thought of it so much. What can be done? I don't know. I don't know. I guess the coaching. I think the sparring, definitely. Like, it was interesting hearing Tris say about me, that Mickey Ward said that. I would say a lot of fighters would say the same thing, that the bulk of their damage was done in the gym as opposed to the fights.
So how's your kind of relationship with boxing these days, Tris? Because you love it, you love the sport, and you love the fighters particularly, and that's why it's because of both things that you've done this. But how do you find watching boxing now? Is it a different experience to how it used to be? I'd imagine it must be.
Yeah, it's definitely changed. It's definitely changed. I still love to watch the boxing like that. I can't imagine that changing too much. But you know, like, I was at Mickey Ward Gatti 1, and I was sat amongst fans, and they were on the seats next to me, and they were jumping up and down on their chairs, excited, and I wasn't far behind them. And I remember actually Mickey Ward fighting Emmanuel Gustus, and I was in a bar in Catskill at the time. And it was a great tear up. I don't know if you guys have both seen that, but a great tear up. And it was sort of, and I knew it was going to be a great fight. So I made sure I got sort of prime location in this bar. And then I went and sort of gradually, like, after a couple of rounds, I was getting more people in from the bar into this TV room and saying, quick, come and see this. And I was so excited because I love those sort of fights. And then, you know, years down the line, I cover, you know, some of Matt's ding dongs, and I've covered Froch and Kessler and some of those great fights, both of those fights, and a lot of Manny Pacquiao fights, and you know, it was thrilling. You know, Manny Pacquiao Marquez 4 was a great war, and then a horrific knockout. Manny Pacquiao against Miguel Cotto as well. Like, seeing some spectacular fights. And now, and I love them, and I love the wars, but now I like a different style. And those sort of Ward Gatti fights, hey, credit where it's due. Like, I don't have an ounce of that courage or desire or ambition. and you know what those guys did, and I was at two of the three fights, was outstanding and should be remembered for years to come. Obviously, it came at a cost for Mickey, and I expect it would come at a cost for Arturo, you know, down the line. So those fights, you know, when I sort of see, it's tough for me. Like when I sort of see a Ted Cheeseman go back to the well, you think that's tough. You know, he's had another tough one there, and like you sort of have a mental checklist and think, you know, and it becomes guilty. You know, I hold my hands up. Great fight, Ted. Thanks for the entertainment. I loved it. I hope everything's all right. You know, and same with Sam Eggington the other night. And I thought he boxed really well. And I was like, geez, you know, how many more Sam got left in him? You know, even though he's relatively young, he's had a hard career. You start to think about this sort of stuff when you watch it. So then when you watch an artist and you watch a boxer, and you know, and it's competitive, but it's not brutal. I get as much satisfaction out of that now as I did a good war in the old days. So I watch it with a different eye. And, you know, I fell out of love with the politics of boxing for sure for a long period of time, with the stupid, you know, ridiculous suspensions that were meted out or not meted out to fighters who failed drugs test, you know, gave up the will to live, writing about Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather for 5 years. And now I sympathize with Matt Christie, who seems to have that now for the Joshua Fury thing for the next few years. And all the shenanigans that go on behind closed doors and stuff, where you know stuff's going on, but like fighters don't want to tell you too much because they want dates, and so they're not going to sort of grass up promoters, and promoters are thinking that they're sort of the best thing since sliced bread, and you've heard that they're not. And it's a very difficult balance, like the politics and the stuff that goes on behind the scenes in boxing. It's a real turn-off, which is one of the reasons why I do Boxing Life Stories, because it's my passion. It's speaking to fighters, speaking to trainers, speaking to the people that I really want to spend time with. And it allows me to sort of stay involved in the sport at that level, because, you know, when I go back to my start in the gym as a young amateur, you know, I love being a part of the club, and I love the other fighters, and, you know, guys that I'm still in touch with now. I'm still in touch with my first amateur trainer. And I remember that passion, and it was about being in the gym and being part of that community that, you know, by now going around the gyms and speaking to fighters, that's where I fell in love with the sport, and that's where my love is.
Well, that's the perfect segue into a couple of other things I wanted to talk to you about before we let you go, and they're two sides of the same coin, basically, because one of them you did for the print format, and one you're doing now for the broadcast format, and it's the Road to Nowhere and Boxing Life Stories. So the Road to Nowhere, which was in this bookshelf, it's fairly well thumbed, actually. I've honestly read that 3 times, I think, and I just love it, because for people who don't know, shame on you if you don't know, but if you don't know, Tris schlepped around the States in the early 2000s with a notepad, not very much money, and a Greyhound bus ticket and some addresses, basically. Every now and again a phone number, but quite often not a phone number, tracking down old champions to write articles about them and try to fund his adventures that way. Then years down the line decided to turn them into a book. He wasn't planning on doing that originally. And the fact that he wasn't planning to do that originally probably makes it even better, actually, because you're not looking for that kind of Hollywood thing that you might be if you're writing a book. And you know, I don't know, I've never done it, so maybe that's wrong. But it just struck me that it turned out kind of perfectly. Some of those stories are just great. I mean, that must have been the time of your life doing that, because the freedom to do that, the initiative to do it, the kind of courage to do it too, because you're in some quite sketchy parts of town at times. You must look back on that now and just think, I can't quite believe I did it, but Jesus Christ, I'm glad I did do it.
Yeah, they were the best days of my life, really. Sort of 2000 to 2004, I was living in America, on and off. And those trips around interviewing the old fighters who sort of vanished brings back so many fond memories. And, you know, every time that someone's died from there's not many left now from the Road to Nowhere. I'm not sure I've been necessarily brought to tears, but it really levels my day. to the point where I feel, because these guys, you know, people like Aaron Pryor, Matthew Sar Mohammed, guys that became really good friends of mine. It's one of the reasons why I've done damage as well. But guys that became friends of mine, and I don't mean that lightly. Like, I mean actual friends where we would chat and, you know, I'd stay with them. These guys, I was no one then. I'm not saying I'm somebody now, but I was no one then. I hadn't written for anybody, and these people let me into their homes and either let me stay with them or took me out to dinner. I ended up obviously seeing people like Gene Fulmer and, oh my God, obviously it's an endless list. Chuck Wepner, Jose Torres, Marvin Johnson, Matthew Sard, obviously became super close with Matthew, Yaki Lopez, all the way over from New York to Vegas and as far north as Toronto and as far south as, so George Chuvalo in Toronto and Florentino Fernandez down in Miami. They were great days. And at the time they sucked because I had no money. So sometimes I was going like 2.5 days without food. But what I do is I would think, right, I need to sleep. And I would go for those trips. I was going to America for say 40 days at a time. In those 40 days, I would spend maybe 3 or 4 nights in shitty motels or hotels. The rest of the time I was on the go. So I was sleeping on the buses, in bus stations. I'd go to sleep in some gyms if a fighter would let me crash in the gym. I slept on the riverbanks of the Hudson a couple of times. I would go to one place in New York. I don't know if Matt was going to New York frequently then, but it was in the days of internet cafes. It was an internet cafe in Times Square at the time, and it was huge. It was near one of the big cinemas. And because like they used to charge you based on the time of day. So 3 in the afternoon, it was heaving. They'd charge you sort of $10 or $15 an hour to get on a terminal. So I would go in there at like midnight, and it was like 12 cents for an hour. And I'd be half asleep at the computer, just thinking I just need to stay somewhere safe till daylight. And I'd be a nodding dog at this terminal and have to go and put in my 12 cents or whatever it was from basically midnight through till about 4 o'clock till it was daybreak. And then before the gyms could open, I could get down to Gleason's or go and do some interviews or go and sleep in Central Park for a couple of hours and get some actual shut-eye. And then the day would start all over again. And then by the time I'd finished doing my interviews and that, I'd be out in that internet terminal, nodding dog again, back to Central Park, get a few more hours sleep, and then back out on the buses to Cincinnati or wherever it was. So yeah, they were great days. In fact, I mean, this won't work for the audio. This is, you know, you get asked these questions. What would you save in a fire? And apart from my dogs, I have a box here. And that's all my stuff from the road to nowhere. So all my pictures, all the audio tapes, everything's in there. My visiting papers for going to see James Scott in prison. Everything is in that box, and it means so much to me that I did that at the best times. And what people don't know really is that before those travels, I'd been busting my arse for America in 2 years, or in America for 2 years. And I was trying to get a break in boxing, doing anything. And, you know, I was around New York, I was around Atlantic City, I was in Philadelphia with Joe Frazier, I was in Atlantic City with Shimon Alvarez and Levander Johnson and Cash White and people like that, and obviously Matthew Sard. And, you know, I was in training camps. I was with the Klitschko's in the Power Gym when they were in town to fight Mercer. And I was with Mercer in Pleasantville when he was getting ready to fight Brian Nielsen. I can't even remember how, but I wound up at that fight in Denmark as part of Mercer's team. And it was just a weird thing. I was just involved in boxing in every way, shape or form. And I had no money, couldn't get anywhere. People would just give me tickets and they'd just know me from the gyms. And it was like a 2-year crash course of, it was quite funny because I didn't really build many relationships there. And you look back and you think, well, why don't I really know anyone from that time? It's because I was a kid and all I did was shut up and listen. And I was so respectful of people that I just didn't say much. I just knew I wanted to be involved in boxing. So I just hung around and was as helpful as I could possibly be. And whether that meant carrying spit buckets around the gyms or cleaning that Catskill gym with bloody toothbrush with Leonard Pierre to make it immaculate, as we did on a couple of occasions. Or even I was a round card guy for women's fights that were showing Delaware. Tracy Harris Patterson's last fight, there was a women's fight there, and I had to get my kit off and walk around with the round card for the women's fights. I just wanted to be involved in the sport. I hated that, and I do have a picture. There's photographic evidence, but I just was desperate to be involved with boxing, and all in the back of my mind, I was thinking, you know, I want to make a difference in this sport, and I want, unlike a lot of people in the boxing media now, who I think build their own profiles and use the sport to try and elevate themselves, I want to leave boxing better than I found it.
So actually, Tris, when you crashed on the airbed in my living room in New York, you were actually fucking living it up.
Oh, mate, that was luxury. That was luxury. Yeah, people won't know that. Yeah, it was funny. I wondered if we were going to go there when you tried to get me onto The Wire that I could never watch. I just not got through it. But yeah, that was funny. And then people thought that boxing news, you know, you travel everywhere and that. But I've always traveled on a budget to try and obviously make everything last. So yeah, it was quite fun. I remember you let me crash there. It was when it was for Cotto Margarito too, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And yeah, I stayed there. And I remember walking down the street with you once. And I said, you do realize, Matt, like, I can't cover any more of your fights now. And you looked at me sort of quizzically. And I was like, because if anyone knows that I crash at your place, they'll think I'm biased towards you. So I never covered another one of your fights because no one knows that till now, the fact that I stayed at your place. But I would never have my impartiality or integrity questioned. So someone would say, oh, well, you know, you give a Matt a soft report there because, you know, you once crashed on his floor. And but no, I did. Yeah, it was a good time. That was. I appreciate it too.
No, good. But and ironically, on the subject we're talking about anyway, I mean, Miguel Cotto, the first fight, the hand wraps, then the second fight wasn't going to happen because of the eye damage.
That's right.
To Margarito, and you know, the New York Commission were back and forth with that for a long time before the fight got sanctioned.
Exactly. And then there were issues, you know, going back to the politics. There was obviously all the issues with John Murray and Brandon Rios on the way in there, and Rios missing the weight and the check weight, and all the bollocks with boxing.
Well, I agree. A couple of things you said there are very kind of illuminating about the way you go about the job, and yeah, I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. This sport is about the health of the sport. It's about the fighters. It should never be about us. You know, we're observers, facilitators. Ego just seems to play such a massive part now with a lot of people who are doing what we're doing in different ways, and impartiality in a lot of ways seems to have just gone completely out of the window. It seems to be very kind of factional at times. Everybody needs to nail their colors to one particular mast, and either you're for one thing or you're against it. Everything, just the world generally just seems to become a much more binary place now. You know, it's impossible to like one fighter and like another one as well. It would appear at times. Even we need to talk a bit of boxing live stories before we let you go, though, because there's been a lot of boxing podcasts come up over the last couple of years. This is one of them. You started yours before us. There weren't quite as many when you started. Boxing live stories is just a great example of just a really good idea. And I often think, you know, when something is a really good idea when you discover it and think to yourself, fucking hell, that's a good idea. How come I didn't think of that? Because it's the simplicity of it, isn't it? It's hard graft. It's hard graft because you've got to get around the place and see all these people. You wouldn't be able to do it if you didn't have the contacts you've got. You wouldn't be able to get as much out of it if you didn't know as much as you know. But turning up to meet people and asking them to tell you about their life, that's a fairly simple format, but nobody had done it. Nobody had thought to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily knew exactly where it was going to go when I did the first one with Adam Booth. It was kind of going to be like catching microcosms of stories. So I think some of the early ones was, you know, Steve Lott and talking about his journey with Mike Tyson, and Pat Lynch talking about living vicariously with Arturo Gatti, and then Paul Williams, you know, talking about his accident. So the idea was to be stories within the stories, but then it just became a long shoot through of a life story. And the thing was, I remember it took me ages to get into podcasts, and I remember Deck Taylor put me in the direction of a Matthew Walker podcast with Joe Rogan, and Matthew Walker's the sleep diplomat. And I found it fascinating. I was like, it was a long form interview about sleep, and it was loads of stuff I didn't know, but it would help me with performance and training and different things. And I found that great. And I remember I was going to actually a boxing fight in the O2. It might have been a Dylan White fight. And I was glued to it thinking, I was thinking I was going to be really tired driving back from that, and I was glued to this Joe Rogan podcast with Matthew Walker. And I thought, well, that's a great format. And then I saw that he'd done some fighters, and I went back and listened to all his old boxing ones, and I was like, that's great. And then I was listening to some of the more contemporary podcasts, so like the Sky Toe to Toe one and stuff. And I was sort of looked through the archives and then I looked at other podcasts, and all the other pods out there was sort of about what had happened last week and what was coming this week. And I was like, well, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect here where everyone's talking about the contemporary stuff in boxing, but no one's got these long form Rogan-esque things. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say I'm Rogan or anything like that, but where there was a longer conversation with one person and one voice to try and sort of drill down a little bit as to what makes someone tick. And I was thinking, apart from the Rogan's long form ones, there was really nothing out there. So obviously I did that sit down with Adam Booth, and it went really well. And it just took off from there. And it's 3 years in September it's been going, and loads of highs, loads of lows. I've done some in Ukraine and New York, Philadelphia, Boston, all up and down the UK, in Vegas. And hopefully I've got a few more left in me. We're heading towards episode 150, which is a lot of grind, as you say.
Well, you're not going to run out of people. That's the beauty of it. I mean, there are so many people in boxing whose stories are absolutely fascinating, whether they're a big name or a medium name, or whether they're somebody, and these are sometimes the best ones, that a lot of people don't even know. It took me a while to get into podcasts as well. And honestly, yours was one of the kind of first ones I started to listen to. And I just really enjoyed the long form of it. I really enjoyed just being able to get stuck into something that, even ones where I felt like I probably knew their story and there wouldn't necessarily be anything new. There always is, because people forget things come back to them. Different things that you might say might just strike a chord they hadn't really thought about for a while. I mean, how do you find also if you're going to do a podcast, then you've got to get behind it and push it on Twitter and Instagram, and you've got to try and stay up to date with the tech side of it and all these sorts of things. We're not the best on that front. Darren Reese, our producer, kind of corrals us and basically does all of that for us, which was extremely fortunate, because that happened almost kind of by accident. But people have got plenty to say on social media about like anything anyone does. I mean, how did you find all of that?
I mean, I am lucky. Like the vast amount of the timeline I look at is positive, so I'm very fortunate with that and the feedback I've had over time, and I'm grateful for that as well, because I'm a real snowflake. Like when it comes to criticism, when I started obviously in journalism, and because I was a news journalist for a long period of time for the Hampshire Chronicle, like serious news when I was freelancing in boxing. I was working at an actual newspaper doing court reporting and numerous things like that before I became the editor of my local paper, before I joined Boxing News. And so like the stuff that you touched upon a little bit earlier about celebrity and people being in it for themselves and building their profile, like that's not me at all. Like I'm not, it doesn't sit right with me. It's not comfortable. I'm not comfortable. So I'm not great putting anything out on social media, because I'd be wary of stuff coming back. And it's probably put giant handcuffs on my career, but it is what it is. And I'd rather go to sleep at night next to my fiance and not be thinking of, to use Anthony Croller's phrase, Barry from Barnsley, and not have him going through my mind, than thinking about the people that I live with and care about and want to spend my time with. So I've sort of wound my social media stuff down substantially and deleted the apps, and now pop onto the websites once in a while to drop in some links and do some communication, but it's massively limited just because I have a quiet life out in the New Forest. I walk dogs, my dogs, and I train and just keep myself to myself. And if people have a bad opinion of me, then it's sad, and I wish they didn't, but it's inevitable. You can't please. The first thing I learned in the editor's chair at Boxing News is you can't please all the people all the time. All you can do is your best, and that's what I try to do with Boxing Life Stories. Not everyone's a home run. As you said, some of the sleepers in there are the best ones, but you know, you just give it your best shot every time and just hope that people enjoy the stuff you put out.
Matt, I think what we enjoy about doing it is that, you know, you start something up and it's your thing, isn't it? And you do it, you put it out there, people listen to it, like it, hopefully, maybe they don't. You know, who cares? To an extent, you know, we do what we want to do, and Tris does what he wants to do. Nobody asked us to do it. Nobody asked him to do it. We just decided to do it, and people can think what they like about it. But generally, you know, the feedback's pretty good. I mean, I think there's a lot of love for Boxing Live stories. Absolutely, 100% I do. You know, I'd see nothing but positive things about it. But that's the great thing about this platform, and that's what we like about it, is that you can do what you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we all love boxing, don't we? We love it all. You know, there's things we wish were different in boxing. There's things we'd like to see change in boxing. The subject we've spoken about today, especially, we'd like to see changes there. You know, the pension funds for retired fighters that Tris spoke about with Robert Smith, that never went anywhere. It'd be great if something like that could come about. But ultimately, we love boxing, don't we? We can knock it and we can wish certain things, but ultimately we do love boxing. We love the sport of it. And as much as the politics and the business can drive us up the wall crazy at times, we're pretty fucking obsessed with that too, you know, because there's a lot of intrigue, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of, oh no, I can't believe that happened. You know, it's gripping, it gets a hold of you, it really does. And it's, listen, we love boxing, don't we? We love talking about it. We love the characters. We love the stories, and I think that's why we do the podcast. I mean, we just enjoy it, don't we?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And particularly over the course of the last year, you know, particularly last year when lockdown came and all of that, it was great just to keep it going, be able to chat with people once a week and just stay thinking about the sport and just a little bit of escapism. It's yeah, I can't imagine not doing it. Put it that way. I just can't imagine not doing it. So final thing before we let you go, I say that like 4 or 5 times during the course of a podcast normally. He's in his boxing cave, Tris Dixon. It's pretty impressive, I have to say. The most impressive thing in it, if you're watching this on the video, is right behind him. And if he just moves a little bit to his right, he's got a Cuba tracksuit, kind of. It almost looks like it's on a mannequin. I'm not sure if it is quite, in the corner there. Now, I see that, and I'm immediately burning with jealousy because luckily for me, I've been to a lot of big international amateur tournaments. And what I've always been trying to do is either steal or purchase kit. And a Cuban tracksuit is something that, I mean, the limit of what I would pay for that is probably disturbingly high. How the hell did you get your hands on that?
Andy, that's not what I want to ask. I'm thinking, is that the 39 kilo Class B schoolboy champions tracksuit?
So that top actually is Lenny Solis's from Belfast when he beat David Hay.
2001 World Championships.
And it came to me via, you know, a dear friend of mine called Phil Rooney, who's no longer with us. And he was a mover and shaker on the Irish scene in Northern Ireland. And I tell you, there's 2 things above that. 2 of my amateur vests are above that, the white and the black ones. And then actually, probably not far behind that Road to Nowhere thing, but a little bit in terms of sentiment. But behind there, actually, that's all my press credentials.
Okay, yeah. I never keep those for some reason. I never keep them. I don't know why.
Probably. See, when Tris picked that up, then I could see now that it was because Tris is a pretty big geezer.
So that's all my press credentials. So I don't know how many there are there, but even now just looking, I see that actually the Cotto Margarito one is facing me there, and then De La Hoya, Stevie Forbes, Amir Khan Maidana, Froch Groves, Pacquiao, De La Hoya, some bangers there, some great memories. And hey, look, this is going back to where we started. You know, those guys are giving me so much memory, so many great memories. This is why Damage has come about, because, you know, I owe boxing. It's given me so much over the last 25 years, and it's my way of trying to make things better for these guys that have given me so many great memories over the years.
Okay, so we will finish then with just a good old-fashioned plug for the book. So it's out now. It's out now in the USA and in the UK. Just give us all the details as to where people can get it. Publishers, shout out to anybody you want to mention. Bear in mind, people, of course, you should double up. Really, you should go for a Dixon double. Get Damage and The Road to Nowhere if you haven't read The Road to Nowhere. If you're listening to Macklin's Take and you haven't read The Road to Nowhere, I'm slightly ashamed of you, if I'm honest. So if you just take it away, Tris.
So Damage it's out. It's been out from 25th of May in the US, 27th in the UK. 4 years in the making. It's available from Amazon, Waterstones, all good booksellers. Try your local booksellers first and foremost. I always recommend that if possible. And huge thanks to Hamilcar for publishing. So when I started writing the book, it was one a bit like Road to Nowhere. I didn't do it. It wasn't for the money. So I started writing the book already. So once Hamilcar got wind I was writing the book, not even through me, I can't even remember who it was, but they contacted me and said, "We hear you're doing this. That's something we believe in. These guys are actually a perfect fit." And when I was in Boston doing the research for the book at the Brain Bank and with Mickey Ward and stuff, I went out to dinner with Kyle and Andy, and I couldn't have asked for two better teammates for this project, because they're not just paying lip service to this book and saying, "Oh, it's a Tris Dixon book. He's got a following on Boxing Life Stories. Let's work with him." They want this subject matter out there, and they believed in the project from the get-go, and they are quite possibly, I wouldn't say quite possibly, as enthusiastic for it as I am. And to match my ambition and to match my feelings towards that, I couldn't hope to work with any better guys. So I'm really grateful for that.
And that's why people need to read it. That's why we were always going to do this, because this is an important subject, and the more conversation we can create around it, the better. An enormous amount of work has gone into this. When you read it, that will become clear. It's years of painstaking research, well written, but you wouldn't expect anything less of somebody who's been at this for a good while. And it's a passion project. It's Tris hasn't come on today because he's trying to sell a few more books to make a bit more money. This was never about that, and that just shines through. That just shines through from pretty much every page, really. So I do urge people to go out there and get it, and get on Twitter and talk about it, because as we discussed when we were talking about the book and CTE, unless there is some kind of movement that gathers some real pace, unless there's some public opinion behind this, then that's what we need. Basically, that's the vehicle upon which all kind of change is mobilized. So thanks very much for your time today. It's been a long time coming. This we will definitely try and persuade you back on at some point. What's your next gig then? What are you up to?
So I've just been up to Sheffield and Leeds, and I've done podcasts with Josh Warrington, Sonny Edwards. Possibly, I never want to say the best ever, and I would never say that because everyone sort of shares so much. But I did an extremely memorable one with Glyn Rhodes, and then Ryan Rhodes and Dennis Hobson. So I had a nice bunch up there. So got those to work on for the next 5 weeks. And now I'm also underway with a biography about Matthew Saad Mohammed, who I mentioned earlier. Did become a friend, a guy who used to let me crash on his friends' floors because Matthew didn't have a place to stay either. So Matthew and I would kick around from apartment to apartment in Atlantic City during those broke days. And some days there'd be a spare bed and he'd take the bed and I'd take the floor. And sometimes I'd take the bed and he'd take the floor. He and I, obviously in The Road to Nowhere, there's that scene of Matthew and I going up to Hopkins, Trinidad and Madison Square Garden as well. I had some wonderful memories with Matthew, and I started writing his book in the first lockdown. I actually found a box. I put it all behind me because it's still quite emotive for me talking about Matthew. And I put the box away, and I was making room and sorting my life out as people did in the first lockdown. And I found this box, and it was a period of time where I was slumming it in Atlantic City, but I was going to Philadelphia in the library every day, talking, and me and Matt were talking about me doing a book about his life stories, but I was a nobody and he was unfortunately a nobody. He'd become a nobody, having been the best in the world at what he did. We talked about doing this book, and I was going to the Philadelphia Library. I was going through all the microfilms every day, and I was getting all the stuff from his career because it wasn't online anywhere. So I was going through the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Daily News, the Bulletin, which is no longer here, got all the clippings, and I was interviewing Matthew daily. And anyway, I found this box of all the clippings of hours and hours of microcassettes. And I thought, you know, I'm probably in a position now in my career where I can get a publisher. I've actually got a signed contract here. The publisher, because I was trying to, Matthew said, you know, we'd actually said we tried to get a publisher. I spoke to an agent and said, the first thing you're going to need to do is to get Matthew to give you his word that, you know, on paper, that he's going to give you the exclusive rights to his book. And I don't know that it's to hand, but anyway, I have a signed contract from Matthew saying that I give Tris Dixon the exclusive rights to my life. We're going to work on the book together. So, and that was in this box. And I was thinking, you know, Matthew died in 2014, and I promised him we were going to do our best to get his story out there. I had that promise, and now I'm in a position where I can execute it. And I hopefully will shine a new light on his life story for future generations.
Well, and it's a hell of a story. It's a hell of a story from beginning to end. So, yeah, I look forward to that one. Absolutely. So, yeah, thanks again. Thanks again. This has been great fun. Thanks for listening, everybody. Normal things apply. If you can get onto iTunes and give us a rate and a review, that kind of thing, it makes it easier for people to find Macklin's take. And we're on YouTube as well, of course. So if you want to head over there and have a little bit of a look, we've been a bit slow on YouTube the last couple of weeks, but we'll pick it back up again when the pace of the boxing world starts to move a little bit quicker. We just didn't really feel that we needed to be doing a YouTube a day, contributing to the already seemingly endless amount of discussion on AJ Fury, when to be perfectly honest with you, we didn't have anything new to say about it. We like to bring a bit of insight, a bit of originality if we can. We may fail sometimes, but that's always the intention. So take it easy, everybody. We'll catch you again next time.